thank you, Annette, for that presentation. And also I want to acknowledge special thanks for keeping to the time. Delegates, I think one of the things that was mentioned or highlighted yesterday, even by our SIGFARO president, was the fact that public service is an honorable service because it is ultimately a necessary service. And it becomes a necessary service when we as finance officials understand who we impact or who we are actually ultimately causing to have a ripple effect on the responsibility and the execution of our own tasks and responsibilities. So I think it's important for us as finance officials to not be myopic of the fact that how we steward what we are responsible for ultimately has a ripple effect on those that are most important, which is the society and communities that we serve in our municipalities. And therefore it's important for us to take note of the fact that how we steward or protect, renew, or expand our revenue-generating assets becomes of vital importance because of who we serve. So with that being said, I want to also now just give an opportunity to our panelists. I'm going to ask Mwanda to come up first to share his comments and his thoughts and contributions, and then we will proceed thereafter with Trevor and Daniel, and then thereafter with Tembisa, and then we will do Julie take questions and answers thereafter. So if you have anything that you would like to raise or question, we will do that at the end. Thank you. Mwanda?
Oh, thank you. Must I come? Oh, I can.
No, you can sit.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for that, Annette. Good day, colleagues. All protocol observed. Yeah, I think for me, when I hear Annette speaking, I think it's what's coming out there is that there's two things. She spoke about intended use, and intended use for me kind of goes hand in hand with law enforcement. And I think when you look at the landscape now, there seems to be perhaps a undervalue of assets, either from council or from senior management from municipalities, where they don't really put much focus in terms of participating and making sure that assets are working for themselves, but also driving what the intended use is, which then filters down to law enforcement. I'll give you an example. For example, if you look at a place like, there's a few places, but if you look at a place like East London, in Monty, where I'm from, you have a beachfront where the ICC is. It's prime property. It's in the area. It's a leisure and a tourism asset. The asset was intended for that, and so you have hotels and so forth around it, and some facilities, as well as some government buildings there. But you find that in terms of operating and use, there's a car wash that's there. That's an informal activity. People sort of park cars, and there's sort of like informal gatherings. People congregate on weekends and use that space informally. So you find that because of unclarity in terms of intent of use, that asset is effectively displaced. The labor that's there, that's washing cars to try earn an income and earn a living, is displaced as well, because it's informal and it's not part of what the asset is intended to do. And therefore, it infringes on the right of use. So as a citizen, I can't use the asset for tourism or leisure purposes because it's, the safety issues, or it's not shaping up for that use. And therefore, the lack of enforcement heightens it. So what it does is it erodes not only the public investment that's been made, but also the private investment around it. So if you recall, a year ago, the same area was the famous stoop where they spent all this money fixing the beachfront, and people were talking about value for money and so forth and so forth. But you find that even though that investment was still made, the use of that asset is not what it was intended for. So for me, what a root cause is, I think, is council misses the intention of asset, or it doesn't enable the enforcement of that use. And therefore, what you have is you have a displaced asset, and then you have a displaced labor participating in that asset, and it erodes the investment made by the state, and obviously the investment made by the private citizens around that area. And then also you have a scenario where you have, I suppose, a lack, or I don't know what you call it, but active citizenry, where we all know, people when they protest, they would rather burn a public asset, and there's kind of a misalignment in terms of understanding that the asset that's built within your context, within your ward, that's public, that's for use, is actually your asset as a citizen, that you must derive benefit out of it, and you must get the use of it, and that your use of it must not infringe on everyone else's freedom and participation. So there's an element where I think citizens need to be trained and just not educated in terms of that assets that are there are actually for us, and we mustn't displace them. I think those are the fundamental issues there. And then when you look at sort of the process of redress and IDP and MIG funding, you find that a lot of those monies are going to replenish assets or build new assets in areas where they were historically disadvantaged, your former township areas where there wasn't roads and so forth, and where there wasn't activity, and the money goes there, and then, which is a good thing. It should happen. You should, new assets should be built up. But what happens when there's a lack of maintenance on existing assets? What happens is the existing areas where you have ratepayers who live there are not experiencing maintenance, and therefore you have this reward of non-paying ratepayers, as it were, if I'm just generalizing, and then you have where you have ratepayers who are paying, are not getting new assets or not getting maintenance, and there's this rift between where the new assets are being built and where the ratepayers are paying, but they're not getting any benefit out of it. So those are the key elements, I think, for me, that cause some of the failures. And I think it does require people, not necessarily the officials, to be on the ground, but it requires much senior management, and including MMCs, to be present and to be advocates of asset use. And I think we, in a country where there's unemployment that is rife, you go to a place like Tsantsabane municipality, areas like that, where there's a lot of mining and mineral resources. You see partnerships form there with the mining companies, where those mining companies actually build roads and they actually invest in the municipality. And also, if we were to look at the tourism elements as a catalytic enabler to ensure efficient use of assets and absorb that labor that's displaced, I think tourism is very underplayed in this country. So yeah, certainly I think government has made the investments there to have assets, especially in the small towns. If you look at small towns where you have a lot of government departments and entities, and you see them thriving, and there's public assets, that I think that investment is visible. But I think the citizens and the actual law enforcement need to actually work together so that the assets are not just compliant, but we actually use assets for intended use so that they can become income generating. Yeah, I think let me just pause there for now.
Thank you, Mawanda. We can go to Trevor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All protocols observed. Ned, thank you very much for the insightful, presentation that touched the key, aspects in regards to our infrastructure as assets in the local government space. And you correctly put it that it's actually an integrated effort, similar to, revenue management in any municipalities. It's actually an integrated program that needs all the service departments within a municipality collaborating with the finance guys. Normally elements like assets, elements like revenue collection, elements like all the finance management in the municipalities are normally expected that they're driven from the finance side. But if you look at infrastructure assets, especially on the economic development of a municipality. These are roads, to be specific, are actually catalytic, assets that drive, and stimulate economic growth. So I think there's a drive right now in municipalities that they need to, focus on their, economic development plans. This will then, drive from your economic planning. You are then able to look at your green assets, the new assets, because now, if a municipality is able to develop this infrastructure and with land as the key, infrastructure within a municipality, if they're able to then develop this, it means that their revenue base is also increasing, and then it then moves obviously to the mechanisms that are in place, the governance that is in place to ensure that there is one clear funded budgets that take into consideration, the maintenance of these assets, as well as then, the collection of adequate revenue that are able to then support and ensure that, the grants that we get from the different, funding modalities are actually used, to, one, improve the current existing assets, because these are revenue generating that will sustain the municipality, and as well as looking at our fundraising. Triple P comes in key when you now look at new developments that needs to happen in municipalities, and I guess those are areas that we now need to tap in with now the relaxation of power generation in our municipalities. Municipalities are then also then able to take and leverage on such PPE, Triple P arrangements, and are able to build income generating assets that, considering that electricity is one of the key revenue drivers in municipalities. If a municipality is able to then drive such infrastructure development projects, they are able to then sustain and ensure that there is a service delivery to the consumers and citizens that we actually serve. So if you look at economic planning, you are also then able to then do your feasibility studies. And then from your feasibility studies, you are able to then come up, with concepts and designs and your costs. This is where your Triple P comes in regards to then the fundraising. But what is then key? Why the current, state of service delivery is affected by, the deteriorating state of infrastructure? I guess it comes with us not having that one look. We can budget for the maintenance of infrastructure, but if we are not able to then, collect adequately, this is where the challenge then kicks in, and we also then need to close off that in regards to that. And for that, we actually need to go back to the basics and understand exactly our revenue value chain from end to end, because municipalities at this point have got a weakness of looking at debt collection as, the alternative, especially when service delivery issues pop up, of which in most cases, these are not routine maintenance as per schedule. We are in a state of emergency where all our maintenance is actually reactive. So now faced with such situations, the immediate, call to action is look at, credit control, debt collection, and this is actually at the tail end of all these processes. It actually starts with the entire revenue value chain, making sure that we've got cost-effective, tariffs, which is a point that, Annette, drove home, that the moment we don't have, cost-reflective tariffs, we are not able to then replace these assets that we're actually looking up to generate, future revenue for the municipality. So all this needs to be covered through, looking at all the pillars in regards to your revenue value chain. But obviously, we need to then start with the economic development and ensure that we drive these processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for that input. Over to you, Daniel.
I just wanted to wait my timer. Good morning, all my fellow servants of the public, whether you're elected or appointed or contracted. That's what we are. We serve the public, and that should be our main focus. I was quite impressed yesterday. Both the SIGFRO president and the minister, placed quite a bit of emphasis on that. That is what we should be doing. I'm very impressed with the way, Annette, you've set up, our conversation on the most critical things that we should look at around asset management, and then also, specifically on cash-generating assets. I'm coming from the asset management background, and obviously I've been looking at, all the legislation that we've had developed over many years, and that starts with the Constitution already. If you look at Section 152, it gives us the mandate or the compulsion to do proper service delivery, but a very important factor there that sometimes is overlooked is the socio-economic development as well in the same section, and then environmentally friendly with community participation. So there are quite a number of elements, that obviously that we have to take in consideration when we are looking at assets as a whole, because those are the tools that we use to comply with the constitutional mandate. And then we've had other, exceptional pieces of legislation that we've, and guidance, and unfortunately, a lot of those we have not been complying with, and I tell you, that is why we are where we are today. That is, and that's my personal view. For example, the 2001, the IDP regulations that were promulgated then. If you look at that, it told us we must do everything. Our planning must be on a wider base. You should actually do your planning in the whole of the district. It should be related. Now, we should actually go further than that, because the IDP also, the regulations also tells us that we should involve other role players, in other words, other tiers of government, SOEs, national government. But then I think something Annette also referred to, assets is not only a financial an accounting function, asset management, definitely not. If we look at, the MFMA, you all are very knowledgeable on that. So you've seen Section 63, which says the accounting officer is responsible for the management of assets. I'm sure you've all seen that. Then in Section 78, it says each senior manager is responsible for the assets within his or her department. So it already there, it gives us the legal requirements of who should be managing the assets. It's not the CFO. Everybody is combined, all the managers combined. And that actually provides an ideal platform where we can, talk to each other in cooperation, collaboration. So whatever we do within the municipality, the corporate, the community, the infrastructure, the budget, treasury office, everybody is in on the plan. That obviously brings me to, the planning side of things. That is where we've fallen way short of where we should be. Starting with the IDP, those process. But then we had in 2013, I think it's the Spatial Planning Land Use Management Act, came in then, and the demand is that we do that first before we do our IDP. In other words, we should do all the spatial planning if we're looking at greenfields, anything new, but we should identify everything spatially first and then quantify that. That's in the Act. We quantify that, as to what exactly do we need. And then we can start with the next phase of devising business plans to see if we can actually do that. So the business plans is in terms of Section 19 of the MFMA. You can look it up. And I'm not sure if any municipality complies with that, because the provision is that before council can approve any project, before they can approve, they must have the details of what will the cost be, the capital cost originally, but they should also have the operating costs identified for the whole lifespan of that asset. So there should be a business plan, including depreciation, should be included in there. And then council must also at the same time determine how they're going to pay for that. What will be the revenue sources, and what will the effect be on the tariff and on the tariff policy. And the tariff policy, all know is in the Municipal Systems Act. It's described there what you should be doing, how you should define that. So we haven't been doing that, to define, okay, we're constructing assets, this is how we're going to maintain them, how we're going to afford to operate them, operate and maintain them, and then replace them at the end, and this is where we're going to recover the money. Unfortunately, a lot of municipalities, has the perception that the equitable share will cover everything. So the equitable share will cover that overseas trip for the mayoral committee as well, But no, it's meant for water, sanitation, electricity, solid waste removal. For those 4 services, then that is for the indigent. So it's only for the indigenous, not for all of it. So it's only for a portion where people cannot afford the tariffs. So, and only for those. In other words, all the other social infrastructure, and that's, for me, that is part of what we should be delivering to the community. That must be funded from other sources, must be funded from rates. Now, we know that if you're not making the ratepayers and consumers happy, they're not willing to pay. There's that saying, a satisfied consumer pays gladly. I don't know if you've heard that, but that is really what, if you, and I mean, I know for myself, if I'm happy with what I'm getting, I'll pay, even though it might be slightly more than what I wanted to pay, but I'll still pay. And then the other side of it, and Annette also mentioned all the service delivery protests, and that is an indication for us that people are not, they're discontented. They're not happy with what they're getting. And there, Dr. Willem Steenkamp, he coined the phrase, contented persons do not protest. So if people are happy, the protests will also disappear. So for me, we have to now buckle down, and it's now the period to do the planning. We got some time before next year, before the IDPs has to be finalized, I think the end of January. And then thereafter, the budgets must be aligned to that. So we must work now harder than what we did when we did the financial statements, the year end. Because we must now plan for the future. We must identify the priority areas and critically focus on that and make sure we get the funding for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And lastly, I'm going to hand over to Tembisa. She will make her input, and thereafter we will take questions and answers.
Thank you. All protocol has been observed. My contribution when it comes to protecting and renewing assets is that when municipalities are buying the property, they purchase or acquire the property, the assets, in order to generate revenue and also to benefit from that assets throughout the lifespan of the assets. So the most critical part that the municipalities need to do when it comes to protecting and renewing is actually having an asset management plan. Because without an asset management plan, you won't be able to know which assets are needed within the municipality so that you guys will be able to provide the service that is needed to the community. You won't be able also to know when is the right time to maintain that asset. Also, when you have an asset management system in place, you will be able to also pick up whereby the assets have been stolen, because we are having, I've seen throughout many municipalities whereby our infrastructure is vandalized through theft or through vandalization, whatever it is that they need into our infrastructure. Imagine having a water infrastructure vandalized by a community, but you as the municipality, you have not budgeted to replace or renew that property in order for the community to have water. Obviously, you will have a community that will not be happy because now they are without water, whereas they are paying for that service. And you as the municipality, you are collecting your revenue, and your income is actually dependent on those communities that are supposed to pay. So if you take longer to replace the assets or to renew it or to maintain it to its initial condition, it means people are going to be left out without water for longer periods. And in doing so, you will have a lot of protests, just like my colleagues have already alluded. So it is very critical to have an asset management system in place. You need also to be able to revalue your assets so that you can see if it still has a longer lifespan and you will still be able to generate more income. I will make an example. Imagine if the whole city, something happened to our transformer and the whole city was dark. But because the municipality hasn't got a plan to easily replace that infrastructure, it means that now the whole of eThekwini will be in the dark city. So it's also important when it comes to getting your investment, because people pay for what they are happy with. If they are not happy, we've seen a lot of people complaining. We've seen also even the Ratepayers Association coming up and saying we are not happy with the service that is rendered by some of the municipalities. So in having the asset management plan and also the asset management system, it means you will also be able to even pick up if your assets have been stolen. And also when you acquire the assets, you'll be able to also make sure that it goes to your asset register. And also, like our main speaker was talking about the funding. Remember, colleagues, assets are your main when it comes to balance sheets, are your main source of you being able to get funding, because that's the thing, that's the critical parts that the banks look at in order to give you guys funding. So not having the asset management in place will mean you can undervalue your assets or you can overvalue your assets. And when the bank do their own vetting, they will easily pick up on those. So it's important to always make sure that whatever is reflected on your balance sheets and whatever is reflected on your asset register is in line with what's happening on the ground. If you need to go and revalue your assets, especially the investment as per the GRAP and also your PPE, so that when you revalue it, it will have a longer lifespan, rather than you thinking, I will still charge for an investment property. If I may make an example, you are still charging a lower rate just because you haven't revalued and also checked the market-related revenue that is generated with when it comes to those areas with the same investment properties that are in that area. So if you have an asset management system in place, you'll be able, when you revalue it, to see that whatever you need to charge in terms of the rental or the revenue that is generated will then be market related rather than leaving it. And also it's important also to renew Because, you know, when you neglect your assets, even the area that we live in within those communities, it doesn't look good. Whereas if you have your assets in place and they're looking good, and then the communities around there will be able to benefit. We've seen municipalities that handle their assets in a good way. We've seen how the communities around there, they actually benefit from that. So the root causes is actually not having an asset management plan or system in place, and also neglecting your assets, and also not having the budget to maintain the asset, because that's the most critical part. You must always have the allocated and the approved budgets for you to be able, whenever something happens to the asset, to easily and quickly replace or renew that asset, so that your communities will not be affected when it comes to service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Tembisa. Let's give them another round of applause.
I think what is highlighted from all of our speakers is the fact that asset management must be prioritized on every level. And as finance officials, it's each one of our responsibilities to make sure that our management of assets are prioritized. With that being said, I'm going to open the floor to questions. By show of hands, if you have a comment or a question that you would like to raise for our panelists, you may do so now. We do have a roving mic that will come to you, just by show of hands. Have our panelists done such a good job that there is no questions?
There's one at the back.
Okay, I note your hand, sir. If you have a question for a specific panelist, you may raise it to them. If it's open-ended, we will give all an opportunity to give an input. Can I ask that we will take all questions, and for panelists to maybe just note that, and then we will answer all.
Show of hands, guys, please. The question?
It was the gentleman there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is open-ended. Anybody who feels that they can reply, it would be appreciated. Last year in the masterclass, we learned that the MFMA requires a municipality to spend 8% of the value of an asset in terms of maintenance every year. So if that does not happen, because it's rather evident in our municipality as an example that it's not happening, what are the consequences? How are we supposed to deal with that then? Because, I mean, that's a requirement, not a suggestion, but a requirement of the MFMA. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if you can just assist me to see the show of hands, if there's any more questions. One in the front here.
No, thank you very much. We welcome the presentation, and congratulations to the presenter for the new role that you are in now. Yeah, my question is on the transfer of risk by municipalities. Is that done enough in terms of insurance? Are municipalities transferring that risk, or do you have instances where you'll find that maybe there's a shortfall in terms of that? Maybe they've underestimated in terms of that. Are they doing enough? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions? Oh, there's one right at the back. Last row, right up on the top. Oh, sorry, one in the front.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, let me also welcome the contributions and the presentations from the panel. Mine, I'm not sure if it's a question, it might be an input, but I think maybe the challenge, as with a lot of other things in municipalities, is that it becomes a BTO issue or a finance issue to say we need to set cost-reflective tariffs, we need to ensure that we have maintenance plans and adequately fund those. So maybe my question is, are we able to attract adequately skilled engineers to assist and support finance in determining all of those cost-reflective tariffs and the maintenance plans of the infrastructure that we have? And then I think one of the panel members also indicated that maybe municipalities depend too much on equitable share, but maybe by extension also on conditional grants. Maybe there is also a need for us to focus on long-term financial planning, especially on the capital funding mix. What kind of funding mix would be adequate for any particular municipality to ensure that they are in a position to adequately fund, especially revenue-generating infrastructure? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Panelists, I hope that you are noting these questions.
Yeah.
We have one hand right at the back. If we could get a mic up. If you can just put your hand up again.
Hello. I just wanted to ask something here. When it comes to road infrastructure, there's a clear share of responsibilities from the various spheres of government. You've got your national roads, you've got your district roads, and you've got your local roads, which therefore means in servicing the communities, all the spheres of government have a bit of a share in terms of the provision of the services. What is a bit baffling, at least within KZN, water authorities faced with a rather complex situation in managing service delivery. And what do I mean by that? The bulk provision of water is maintained and is a responsibility of the district municipality. The reticulation of water to customers is a responsibility of the same municipality. So the entire value chain for water provision is only linked to the municipality. And it's an expensive service to basically provide. And when you try and look at the concept of cost-reflective tariffs, it still remains quite expensive, and it's not a situation where you can transfer those costs onto the customer. Hence, if a similar approach, perhaps, of sharing responsibilities is also seen within the water provision, where the national departments can take a portion of the responsibility, and so will be the provincial departments as well, and a sort of a portion is given to the municipality based on the fiscus as well as the muscle that they have. You look at instances like water boards. I'll also refer to a case within the KZN. Umgeni is literally billing municipalities, and whatever excellent services they're providing to district comes at a cost to the district. So there's a heavy responsibility that is given to district. There's no sharing of responsibilities, and I'm not sure if the panel has any sort of bite on such, and whether we should consider restructuring, all in the spirit of reconsidering maybe funding models and even provision of service models. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. We can maybe just take one or two more, if there is any. Okay, I don't see any, so we can give our panelists the opportunity to respond. I'm going to ask maybe Annette to start, and thereafter, if you have a comment or contribution to make, you can.
Thank you. Colleagues, thank you for those questions. Excellent questions. I'm going to start with the first one, and the MFMA 8% of the asset value of assets and what the consequences are. I think the first one, yeah, the 8% is part of the norms and standards set by National Treasury contained in MFMA Circular 71. And of course, you know, I've had mixed feelings over the years around the 8% because it also depends on the way in which your assets are valued. And colleagues, we're very mindful that over the years, asset accounting practices within the sector changed from fund accounting into the erstwhile GAMAP into GRAP, and when GRAP was adopted, GAMAP at the time was adopted, different approaches was taken by different municipalities. Some municipalities embarked on an asset revaluation strategy in totality at that point in time, and then of course those asset values are far higher than neighbouring municipalities that may have said that they rely on what is in their accounting records as cost. They kept it as a true reflection of cost. And as those assets are being phased out, of course the challenge starts to becoming smaller and smaller. But there's still legacy issues that's sitting in many of the asset registers. So 8% of the asset value, depending on the way in which your asset valuations were done, would differ quite substantially from municipality to municipality. Now, of course, I think the important thing that National Treasury is trying to bring across here, and that is so important for all of us, is that you need to look at an adequate amount of maintenance to ensure that your assets are kept in a good working condition. And the norm was, of course, you know, benchmarked on international best practice standards, and that's where the 8% of the asset value comes from. What's the consequences of if us not doing that? Of course, you know, we don't want to look at what's the consequences in terms of what we see on paper. You may find as part of your budget assessment processes, comments will be raised that there is inadequate maintenance being spent on your assets. But the ultimate consequence is that we are not going to be able to render services in a sustainable manner going forward. So the 8% sometimes is a big number. There's different norms. There always was a norm also to say that 7% of your total operating budget needs to be spent on maintenance. And I think one needs to balance that. We shouldn't just look blankly at numbers and say it must be this percentage or it must be that percentage. Ensure that you've got proper maintenance plans and that you can illustrate what is the amount of maintenance that is in fact needed for the asset base that you've got, and then budget for that, and you should be good. But as I indicate, you know, I think as all of the colleagues here this morning indicated, is we know that there's a challenge with insufficient amounts being spent on maintenance, and that's why it was legislated to the extent that it was, to say that it really must be done, even though it's really a sound both asset management and financial management practice. The issue around transfer of risks, I fully support the view. We need to ensure that there's adequate transfer of risks. And when we look at transfer of risks and we look at insurance, it comes back to our asset register. Because we oftentimes find that the asset register, of course, being the basis of the insurance portfolio, being the basis of the risk transfer and the negotiations between the municipality and the insurance company on the level of risk transfer, because depending on affordability, you would also determine what level of risk transfer you are looking at, what is the risk that you want to maintain in-house in the municipality based on your own risk appetite. But if we don't have sound asset registers, and if we don't have proper values, specifically around our investment property, our buildings, and there is something that happens to that asset, there's a fire that we see so frequently now, a building is completely destroyed, and if the amount that that building was insured for is, of course, not the right value, it would be underinsured, and the amount that the insurance will pay out will obviously be reflected in that. So part of the total asset management strategy, indeed, the issue of risk transfer and adequate insurance of those assets, to the extent, that your policies are looking at transfer of risk versus in-house risk management. The BTO office always gets the brunt of everything in my view. Everyone looks at finance to ensure that there are cost-reflective tariffs, that there are asset registers, that there are maintenance plans. But I firmly believe that this is something that an accountant doesn't have adequate skills for. Even the most highly qualified accountant is not skilled to ensure that maintenance plans are provided. And I fully agree with the Speaker that we need competent engineers to assist with those and to take responsibility of those functions. But indeed, we do have a challenge in local government and in the broader government that it's difficult to attract qualified engineers. We've got a skill shortage in the country in all sectors on qualified engineers. And this is something that all sectors need to work together. Start with collaboration with private sector where necessary, and start looking at ways to enhance the skills within a municipality to ensure that those maintenance plans can be attracted. And of course, we don't want to be fully reliant on consultants, but there's indeed space in the environment where there are skill shortages within a municipality to, of course, gap those skills or those skill gaps temporarily with external support through insourcing or outsourcing of skills. There is a high reliance on equitable share, and I think one of our speakers, Dani, spoke about that the equitable share is really intended to provide services for the most vulnerable within our communities, and that municipalities shouldn't rely on equitable share for the broader funding base, but that those funds be earmarked and really used to supplement in terms of our tariffs that we've got to ensure that the vulnerable community members are in fact assisted through the equitable share. And then it does come down to a funding mix, and a funding mix is municipal specific. You need to look at your municipality, you need to look at exactly what the revenue raising abilities within the municipality is. What does your rate base look like? To what extent can you raise internal revenue? To what extent will you be reliant on grants for your social infrastructure? And where does other funding mechanisms then start to come in when we talk about your capital funding? Operating funding, of course, needs to be generated within the municipality and then supplemented by grant funding, such as your equitable share where appropriate. And the last question, I think that's quite a difficult question. I think a lot of discussion and intergovernmental discussion is probably required around the water service and the funding of the water service. I think the Honourable Deputy Minister yesterday spoke about the same thing, to say that maybe 30 years ago, when we looked at the funding of municipalities and the revenue model of municipalities, certain assumptions were made that 30 years into the democracy has proven to not be as stable a source of revenue as initially anticipated, and definitely the water service falls within that. There's a lot of challenges within the water service and a lot of funding challenges, particularly with water being a scarce resource, number one. So the cost of water we can expect to escalate tremendously within the future. Droughts, more and more droughts with climate change are expected to hit the country, and that of course will put additional pressure on tariffs. We always know that where the resource becomes scarcer, the tariff pressures are starting to mount on an annual basis, and definitely discussion is required, and definitely this is something that needs to be more prevalent on agendas going forward and with intergovernmental discussions. How will we solve for the cost of water infrastructure? And of course, one big cost element, the cost that we have got with non-revenue water that is prevalent in most municipalities. How do we solve for that? Of course, I don't have the answers from here, but I think that's something that must be top of agenda, that we can really solve for the issue around water resources and the funding of water going forward. I'll stop there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, I'm going to ask Mwanda if you can come in to make your contributions.
Yeah, just quickly on the water. I think what's important is I'm not sure we are firstly looking at what Annette was saying about the makeup of our consumers. How many indigenous do we have, and how many businesses do we have, and if our revenue targeting is actually accurate. And I think in terms of the water, I think we'll follow the same path of the Eskom and the electricity. I mean, we've seen it in the past where Eskom will charge a municipality, and then the municipality will be under pressure to collect. And then the first thing they do, they switch off all the businesses in town, and then all of a sudden you know that the municipality is now busy with people now coming to pay. So. And then obviously that will follow a impairment process, who can pay, who can't pay. then you write off those debts and so forth. So I think in terms of the water provision, I think it will follow that same path where we've seen the costing of electricity and the writing off of those debts. I mean, look at how many impairments are made on financial statements. I mean, it's shocking. You have all these tariffs and you have all these revenue targets, but you sit with all these big impairments at the end of the day. So it's almost like we're following a compliance exercise to have the right tariffs. But if you look at the zoning even, you know, some businesses are operating as businesses, but they're in residential areas. So your tariff is not accurate because of the law enforcement that wasn't there initially. And we know that these guys operate, but we're not enforcing them or changing the tariffs in time to be reflective. I think in terms of just going back to the cost of asset, I think when you look at the service costs, if you look at the vehicles and the maintenance and those costs, another cost that we don't actually really drill it down to is the insurance cost, because that's a coverage cost. That's across all assets, but and it's an expensive cost, and I think we don't actually drill down to what extent are we insured, what are we insuring, so we can actually drill down to the service cost of each asset. And I think what's shocking for me is that if you look at a majority of municipalities, you'll see that they're underinsured. And the reality is they can't afford to insure all assets. If you look at all heritage assets, a heritage asset, you must insure it according to the Heritage Council body. You must bring that asset back to what it was. So if you have a heritage asset with specific sandstone, brick, and all these things, it may be sitting on your register at a replacement cost, depreciated replacement cost of 12 million, but actually to put it back at current replacement cost, because of its heritage and significance, you're sitting at a 92 million rand asset, and you can't really insure, you know, large assets like that, a number of assets like that, with such a high value. So there is underinsurance of assets, and I think for me what's worrying is that we're paying all these costs, but in the end, and all these premiums that we're paying, but in the end, what do we actually derive in terms of do we get that money back when we have to claim for those assets? So I think in terms of whether it's 8% or whatever the case is, the general costs and again, a silent cost there is the depreciation, because if it's in use, it's depreciating and it's sitting on your cash flow, so it's an outflow. But in terms of insurance, what is the actual cost we're paying for assets? And I think for me, municipalities need to be more deliberate in terms of which assets are insured. And I think heritage assets should be key. Those should be preserved because of their significance. And I think office buildings, we should look at a mix in terms of those costs. Do we insure all those assets? Do we outsource and have community members actually look after those assets in terms of maintenance of those assets? Because we also don't maintain some of the buildings, but we insure them. So you pay a premium per month to have it insured for fire and all these things, but the building is actually not maintained, and there can be easy theft taking place in the building. So those costs for me, I think, though Treasury is prescriptive in terms of the percentages, but I think we need to, as municipality, drill down to what is the cost we are paying to service the asset, but to insure the asset. I think that's my comment.
My comment on the 8% value of assets, there was a question that said, what will then be the implications of not spending the 8% in terms of maintenance plans? I think I agree with our main speaker to say each municipality is different. But the most important thing in terms of the 8% value is actually having a realistic maintenance plan that can be supported and also be then forwarded to National Treasury to show that it was actually below 8%, if it is below 8%, and you have enough supporting documents to substantiate as to why you did not reach the 8%. Instead of you having to go and spend unnecessarily and overspend on maintenance for the money that could actually be channeled into other areas in terms of delivering a service. And then when it comes to implications, you might actually get audit findings or audit queries when it comes to not spending the 8%, but as long as you have sufficient support to substantiate as to why you did not reach the 8%, then you should be fine. And then when it comes to insurance, I believe when it comes to insurance, you actually need to insure the asset to the value of replacement rather than insuring it at cost. Because when you have went and revalued your assets, having it at a lower cost, it means then you will have a shortfall that you might not have been budgeted for, or you have no budget that is allocated to that. So when it comes to insurance, I believe that it will go hand in hand with your asset register. How much is the assets and what is the replacement value of that asset? As soon as you have the replacement value, then you know you will be able to replace the asset when it's needed. And also it's important to do the frequent checking with insurance, just like how you do with your individual, because we also need to treat businesses as we treat ourselves. Because with your assets, you also do it frequently to get the quotes instead of saying how much will it cost to replace this house, this television, this what and what. So with your assets as well, with the municipalities, you frequently have to go and consult with the insurance companies to check on the values of assets in terms of their realistic values, so that you'll be able to actually have enough budget to replace that assets. And then when it comes to sharing in terms of road infrastructure or water issues, I believe funding models do need to be looked at. And also not that, but there need to be an open communication between the national departments and local government as well as provincial, especially when there's that sharing of cost in terms of there's national roads, there's provincial roads, and there's local roads. We've seen with the floods whereby we needed to rebuild our cities, and in that we were able to do that because there was that open communication amongst those departments. So I think that will assist in terms of then sharing the cost when it comes to the roads or the infrastructure that is shared amongst these three spaces or spheres of government. That's my contribution. Thanks.
Thank you, Tembisa. I'm going to ask for Trevor to come in, and then thereafter Daniel.
Okay, thank you. I'll just comment on the last a point that was raised from the colleagues in regards to the water distribution, sharing costs with government, provincial, and district. So I think my input in regards to that is the fact remains. I know the concern was the end user will not be able to, pay for this cost if we were to then look at cost reflective tariffs. But I still stick to that. This needs to be adhered, because this is, I guess, the pitfall that we are all sitting with. Even if you now look at the increases that Eskom is now running with, it is actually an effect of the incorrect costings that was done previously. So if we will then need to reflect on the indigency. It's not a secret. The economy shrunk, and there's a lot of people that are living below the breadline. So we then need to look at what indigency in those areas to ensure that it then looks at your equitable share that you get from National Treasury, and also one key element that I've also driven in this discussion is us looking at stimulating the economy through, local economic development plans, and also, going in that area, because this will then build communities that are then able to pay for these services. I thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Daniel, you can come in with your contributions.
Thank you. I'll get another chance. Yeah, interesting. I think it's very pertinent questions. The question regarding the level of provision for maintenance that a municipality needs to make. The norm that was put as a guideline by, in terms of the MFMA is not legislation. It's not in the MFMA as a guideline. That was based on an international best practice where and we must also there look at what is internationally happening. Most of the other countries, Australasia, Canada, and all that, America, they actually disclose their assets on the valuation method. So they perform a valuation on an annual basis. In other words, the norm, the value of the assets then that is disclosed is a depreciated replacement cost in essence. Whereas in South Africa, most municipalities I knew of one in KZN who also chose the valuation method, but they converted to cost less depreciation. You can say that if we place that norm on our cost less depreciation, obviously the 8% will be considerably less perhaps than the depreciated replacement cost. That is the potential. So it's just a guideline. What is more accurate, and I think that is what the Auditor General has been, placed some emphasis on all municipalities for many years now. You should have a costed maintenance plan. In other words, you should determine what is required specifically for your major assets. What do we require to do to keep them in a state where they can deliver the service for their expected lifespan? So you must then provide for that, and you identify it to materials, transport, personnel, outsourced, all those categories that you need to report on in any case. You identify that in your budget. What I've been telling lots of officials before is you then take that maintenance plan, costed maintenance plan, that you can support with its actions and real things. You take that to council. And if council then decide to reduce the maintenance budget, you can then ask the question, you tell us which assets should we not be maintaining. So you can get it recorded that is a decision made by council because it cannot be afforded. Not just a general thing. I know I've been involved in framing financial plans and budgets for many years, and invariably that is what happens. When it's not balancing, when we can't find all the revenue, it's easy, cut the maintenance budget. But you should be more accurate than that. And I think that should be the principle. If you want to maintain your assets, you must have a focus on, okay, what are we going to do? I noticed in the 23 MFMA reports from the AG, for some reason, that reference they always had about maintenance plans was not in there. And I wondered about it, but what happened, I believe, is that lots of municipalities framed maintenance plans. So they have a plan, but it's not costed. It's not included in the IDP, it's not included in the budget. So I think that is where we need to start planning better and make sure that we can maintain our assets. And also then, obviously in that you should have that forecast for at some stage, you must rehabilitate that asset because a lot of them will require rehabilitation after 10 or 12 years to make the 20 years. So all of that should be included in a costed plan. You should have, it must be budgeted, and you must make sure that you can have revenue, that you can have funds to finance that. That is the maintenance, on the maintenance issue and the 8%. I'm saying take it as a norm, a target perhaps, but it's not enforceable, and it's not necessarily, I don't know, realistic in our scenario anymore. We in South Africa, we do things differently. On the issue of water and the water supply, I've had some interaction with lots of academics, and a lot of them are looking at the legal angle, there as well, what should be put in place. And they started with the Constitution, because in terms of the Constitution, the national government must be part of ensuring that every person has access to water. So there is an onus on the national government to also contribute to this whole method for us to making sure people have access to water. Obviously, it then filters down to all the other SOEs and the water boards, etc. Because at the moment, I know it's very difficult in KZN, where the districts end up with having to recover from consumers, and the costs have been preloaded now. They haven't, a bulk purchase cost that's it. They have to pay that. So it is a difficult situation. There should be collaboration, cooperation right down from the top to the bottom. There are some big plans, going at the moment with the national government, building more dams, making more water available. That is, I think in the case of Johannesburg, it's a well-known fact that there's a huge backlog of maintenance there that hasn't been done in the reticulation within that city. Now, they have vast lines of water, and it acts more or less like a sieve. So you're pumping in water, huge quantities, and then it just flows out. That is our major problem that we, as far as water is concerned. It's not necessarily the non-payment, but the water losses. I think Tequini, they were talking about 50% of the bulk water, and that's purified water. I mean, it's gone through a whole process. It's drinkable water. It's lost in reticulation. That must be an absolute priority, because water is a scarce resource, and you can't show me one person that can do without water. You can do without electricity, but without water you will die. That's for sure. So we need to make this an absolute priority and make sure whatever we're doing on our spatial development plans, on our IDPs now, we actually get those as high priority projects, and we need to find funding for that. There was a question on the roads, which is for me of huge interest, specifically I think in KZN and in the Eastern Cape. There was a project, a rural roads asset management system project, that was run by the National Department of Transport for quite a number of years, I think 6 or 7 years. I'm not even sure if it's still going, but it was, where they went through the whole of the countryside, identified every single road, recorded it, did an assessment. They had technicians that they trained up to be able to do the reporting on the conditions of all of that. But importantly as well, they identified which roads are which entity's responsibility. Because there were quite a lot of grey areas between what is the provincial DOT, where does your road end, and where does the municipal road start. There were a couple of very interesting questions where it was a provincial road, but now the municipality built houses on both sides of the road and upgraded it. So whose road is it now? So that is where there should be collaboration, cooperation as well, even on the roads on that subject. What bothered me about that program is that in KZN, it was actually managed by the district municipalities. And as you know, the district municipalities in KZN doesn't have any function, any obligation to do anything about roads and stormwater. That's because it's all local municipality functions. And for some reason, all that detail, and it's included the GIS, the whole story, all of that was not necessarily given to all the local municipalities to be able to identify and use going forward. So it's perhaps something that you can follow up with where you are, if you're in a local municipality, you can follow up with your district and with the Provincial Department of Transport, and I think the same in the Eastern Cape. I don't think the program ran in other provinces, but definitely, it was definitely in every single district in KZN, it was running, it identified all of that. I was going to answer on the insurance, but I see the person who asked the question is not here anymore. I don't know, but just for interest, obviously a lot of municipalities have assets that they cannot really afford to pay insurance on. I know some municipalities which have 50 plus community halls, and they all, they're all over this, within the municipal area. So they're unprotected, they're not, it's very difficult to secure them. And then they also, I mean, sometimes the one municipality where I've been doing some assistance, they had snowfalls there, which the snowfalls damaged the buildings. Yeah. That you have to actually, if you're doing your risk management properly and you set it up in your risk register and you determine what risks are we prepared to accept, and then you also determine how can we mitigate those that we do not want to accept as such. Can we afford that? You must make those decisions, on those, specifically on those big assets. I mean, the replacement cost of a community hall, would most probably be a couple of million. So, if you multiply that, I think some municipalities also, because it's part of the functions in terms of Section 156 of the Constitution, the schedules, creches, early childhood development, lots of municipalities even have creches. So do you insure that as well? So it becomes very, very expensive and unaffordable as such. And there as well, the conversation can perhaps be made with the Department of Social Development, should it be done or not? Would they cover that cost? Because they cover the operating costs of the creches. So yes, we have lots of work to do, lots of planning, strategies and planning and conversations, collaboration, cooperation. That is really the critical point where we need to go from here on. Thank you.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause. We trust that their inputs are inputs that you can take back and really make changes in your specific domains and spheres in local municipalities, and bring the much needed change that is needed.